My father sent me a text that read, "Do not come to your sister engagement party. The guest list is final." I was standing in the most secure room in the country when I read those words. A week later, my entire family was publicly humiliated on national television, their fake high society facade completely destroyed by the very daughter they called socially unfit. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who constantly underestimated your worth. I am Alyssa, 33 years old, and for my entire life, my family treated me like an embarrassing afterthought. Growing up in Oak Cliff, Virginia, my parents, Richard and Diane, valued appearances above all else. They wanted perfect, polished daughters who would marry into money and elevate our family status. My younger sister Brittany fit their mold flawlessly. She was a pageant queen, a social media addict, and their undisputed golden child. I was the quiet one who preferred reading over parties, the one who worked 3 jobs to pay for college because my parents spent my college fund on Brittany car and wardrobe. They always assumed I was a failure because I did not care about designer bags or country club memberships. That fundamental misunderstanding reached its breaking point on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work standing in the middle of the White House Situation Room. I am the Deputy Director of Crisis Communications. My job is to manage national emergencies, advise cabinet members, and draft speeches for the President of the United States. It is a high-pressure, exhausting, and incredibly powerful position. But to my parents, I was just a lowly paper pusher with a dead-end government job. They never asked about my career, and I stopped offering details years ago. On this particular Tuesday, we were dealing with a massive national security leak. The room was buzzing with tension. Cabinet secretaries were arguing, phones were ringing, and the chief of staff was demanding a press strategy in 10 minutes. I was standing at the edge of the conference table, reviewing a draft of the emergency press release, when my personal phone vibrated in my pocket. Normally, I would ignore it. But my mother had been calling repeatedly all morning, and a small part of me worried there might be a family emergency. I pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. It was our family group chat. I had sent a message earlier that morning asking what time I should arrive for Brittany engagement party that weekend. The response from my father, Richard, hit me like a physical blow. "Do not come to the party, Alyssa. The guest list is already set, and there is simply no room for you." I stared at the screen, the chaotic noise of the Situation Room fading into the background. I was his daughter. This was my only sister engagement party, and I was being told there was no room for me. Before I could even process the cruelty of his words, my sister Brittany chimed into the group chat. Her message was long, calculated, and dripping with condescension. "Look, Alyssa, do not make this a big deal. Jamal has invited some extremely important people to this party. His guest list is full of elite politicians, real estate tycoons, and major donors. You are just too socially awkward for an event like this. You never dress right. You do not know how to network, and you always act like a wallflower. I cannot risk you embarrassing me or Jamal in front of his high-profile guests. They need to see us as a power couple. Just take an Uber to a spa this weekend or something. We will send you pictures." My mother, Diane, immediately added a heart reaction to Brittany text, sealing my exclusion with a single digital tap. That was how my family operated. They formed an impenetrable wall of hostility, united in their belief that I was the inferior child. My chest tightened as I read her words. Jamal was her fiancé. He was an African-American real estate developer who had recently decided he wanted to run for state senate. Jamal was charismatic, ambitious, and utterly obsessed with his public image. He desperately wanted to break into the Washington political elite. My parents practically worshipped the ground he walked on because he represented the wealth and status they craved. They treated him like royalty, catering to his every whim, while treating me like an uncultured peasant who was not fit to breathe the same air. The irony was staggering, almost suffocating. Right at that very moment, Jamal was probably throwing money at local party planners trying to impress small-town mayors and minor donors in Oak Cliff. Meanwhile, I was standing in the White House, literally holding the president's speech in my hand, surrounded by the most powerful people in the free world. Jamal was desperately trying to buy his way into a political circle that I already commanded. A sharp voice snapped me back to reality. My deputy leaned over, pointing at a line in the press release. "We need to soften this language before the briefing," she said urgently. "The press corps is going to tear us apart if we sound too defensive." I nodded, forcing my professional mask back into place. "You are right," I told her. "Change the phrasing in the second paragraph. Keep it authoritative but calm." As she hurried away to make the edits, I looked back at my phone. The group chat was silent, waiting for my reaction. In the past, I would have cried. I would have called my mother, begging for an explanation. I would have tried to defend myself, listing my achievements, trying to prove that I was worthy of a seat at their table. But the scared, desperate daughter who needed their approval was gone. 5 years of navigating cutthroat Washington politics had forged me into someone entirely different. I had faced down hostile foreign press-managed national scandals and survived the most brutal work environment on earth. A text message from a superficial sister and a status-obsessed father was not going to break me. I looked at the message from Brittany again. "You are too socially awkward. You do not know how to network. I will not let you embarrass Jamal." I felt a cold, hard sense of clarity settle over me. I did not type out an angry response. I did not list my job title or my salary. I did not tell them that the very politicians Jamal was trying to impress were currently waiting outside my office for talking points. Instead, I simply typed 2 words: "No worries." I hit send, locked my phone, and slipped it back into my pocket. I turned my attention back to the massive screens on the wall of the Situation Room where the news networks were standing by for the upcoming presidential address. Let them have their little party, I thought to myself. Let Jamal play his political games. I was not going to fight for a place in their fake, shallow world. I was going to let them dig their own graves, and I was going to watch them fall. I barely had a second to process the sheer audacity of my sister before my deputy rushed back to my side. She slapped a tablet onto the table. "We have a massive problem," she whispered urgently. "Someone just leaked the preliminary budget documents to the press. Senator Harrison is getting absolutely crucified on live television right now. Political commentators are ripping his record apart. They are accusing him of secretly cutting essential veteran benefits to fund the massive new infrastructure bill. If we do not kill this false narrative within the hour, his entire career is completely over, and the legislative bill is dead in the water. We cannot afford a scandal of this magnitude." I pulled the tablet toward me, my fingers flying across the screen. Senator Harrison was a crucial ally for the administration, and losing him was not an option. I drafted a rapid response statement coordinating with his communications director to issue a fierce denial and pivot the narrative toward the actual bipartisan gains in the bill. My mind shifted entirely into crisis mode, a zone where I operated with absolute precision. I was directing traffic between 3 different federal agencies when my personal phone buzzed again in my pocket. It buzzed twice, then a third time. The rapid succession of notifications meant only one thing. My mother, Diane, was on the warpath. I ignored the constant buzzing for another 5 highly stressful minutes, finalizing the official press release and sending it directly to the White House briefing room for immediate distribution. Only when the crisis was contained did I pull my phone out. There were 4 private messages from my mother. I opened them, bracing myself for the inevitable barrage of gaslighting. "Alyssa, I saw your message in the group chat," she wrote. "Do not use that passive-aggressive tone with us. Your sister is under an immense amount of pressure right now, and you are being incredibly selfish. Jamal is an important man, and this party has to be flawless." I stared at the screen. I had said 2 words: "No worries." Yet in my mother-twisted reality, accepting my exclusion was somehow an act of aggression. The next text arrived immediately. "You brought this on yourself, Alyssa. If you had just been a supportive sister and loaned Brittany the $10,000 she needed for her engagement dress, maybe she would feel differently about having you there. But you refused. You chose to be petty over money. I gripped my phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. A $10,000 dress for a simple engagement party. When Brittany had demanded the money last week, I had calmly explained that my finances were tied up in investments. That was the truth, but even if I had the cash sitting in a checking account, I would never hand it over to fund her delusions of grandeur. I had spent my entire youth watching my parents drain their bank accounts to buy Brittany pageant gowns, cheerleading uniforms, and eventually a luxury car for her high school graduation. Meanwhile, I worked the brutal night shift at a local diner, wiping down greasy tables and serving drunk patrons just to pay for my own textbooks and basic living expenses. I never asked them for a single dime. I had paid off my massive student loans entirely on my own, while my parents happily financed Brittany endless luxury vacation trips across Europe. But my mother was not done. The next message was the longest, and it carried the distinct venom she reserved only for me. Frankly, Alyssa, you are 33 years old and you have nothing to show for it. You have no husband, no prospects, and you are wasting your life away in that dead-end government paper-pushing job. You barely make ends meet while Jamal is building a real estate empire. You would stick out like a sore thumb at a high society event like this. You just do not belong in those circles. Do yourself a favor. Take an Uber to a cheap spa this weekend and stay out of sight. Do not ruin this for your sister just because you are a disappointment. The word disappointment echoed in my mind. For years, that word had been a heavy chain around my neck. I used to cry myself to sleep wondering why my best was never good enough for Diane and Richard. I had sacrificed my youth to build a career they could respect, only to realize they did not value hard work. They only valued the illusion of wealth and the shallow prestige of their local country club. I looked up from my phone. The monitors in the Situation Room were now broadcasting the breaking news. Senator Harrison was standing at a podium delivering the exact words I had written for him just 10 minutes ago. The chyron across the bottom of the screen read, "Crisis averted, White House issues, strong rebuttal." The room around me exhaled a collective sigh of relief. The chief of staff caught my eye from across the table and gave me a firm, respectful nod of approval. I was the furthest thing from a disappointment. I was the person holding the safety net for the most powerful leaders in the nation. I looked back at my mother text message about my dead-end paper-pushing job. A very cold, dark smile crept onto my face. I did not reply. Let them believe I was spending the weekend crying in a cheap spa. Let them parade around Oak Cliff thinking they were the absolute height of elite high society. Jamal might have local money and a big ego, but he was a small fish in an incredibly massive ocean. They were all about to learn a very painful, completely humiliating lesson about real power. The storm they were blindly walking into would be entirely unforgiving and absolute. I was finally ready to stop protecting them from their actions. I pulled up the text thread with my mother. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second. I did not justify my existence. I did not defend my career or my bank account. I did not try to explain that I was currently standing in the nerve center of the free world. I simply typed two calm words. No worries. I hit send and immediately toggled my phone to Do Not Disturb. I slipped the device into my tailored blazer pocket, silencing Oak Cliff, Virginia, and all of its pathetic local drama. The heavy mahogany doors of the Situation Room opened, and my focus snapped entirely back to the fate of the nation. I grabbed the leather portfolio containing the final revised speech and moved swiftly down the corridor. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floors as I navigated the labyrinth of the West Wing. Secret Service agents nodded respectfully as I passed their earpieces buzzing with encrypted chatter. Cabinet members and senior advisors stepped aside to let me through, knowing exactly who I was and what my presence meant. I was the person they called when the walls were caving in. The absolute contrast was almost laughable. In my family-twisted hierarchy, I was an awkward, underachieving spinster who could not scrape together $10,000 for a party dress. In this building, I was Alyssa, the Deputy Director of Crisis Communications. I commanded a substantial six-figure salary, but more importantly, I commanded the narrative of the entire country. I possessed security clearance levels that Jamal and his wealthy golf club buddies could not even begin to comprehend. They were currently playing dress-up in rented tuxedos, trying to impress small-town mayors while I was literally shaping global history on a daily basis. I approached the Oval Office. The Marine Guards standing outside opened the heavy white doors without a single word. I stepped inside the most famous room on Earth. The air was thick with heavy anticipation. The President of the United States stood near the resolute desk, reviewing urgent briefing notes with the Chief of Staff. When he saw me enter, he looked up and offered a tired but deeply grateful smile. "Alyssa," he said, his voice steady but carrying the immense weight of the morning chaos. "Tell me we have a solid angle on this disaster." "We have more than an angle, Mr. President," I replied, walking directly to him. I handed over the thick leather portfolio. "We have the high ground. The phrasing is completely locked in. We address the budget leak, immediately control the news narrative, and pivot directly to the national security benefits of the new bill. They cannot attack our domestic infrastructure spending if we frame it strictly as a vital defense initiative." The president opened the portfolio and scanned the pages. His eyes moved rapidly over the words I had just written under immense public pressure. I watched his posture visibly shift. The tension in his broad shoulders dissolved. He nodded slowly, tapping the heavy cardstock paper with his index finger. "This is brilliant," he said, looking back up at me with profound respect. "You threaded the needle perfectly, Alyssa. Thank you for this." "Just doing my job, sir," I replied, maintaining my professional composure even as absolute pride swelled in my chest. 2 minutes later, the president was walking down the colonnade toward the James S. Brady press briefing room. I followed closely behind, standing off camera with the rest of the senior communications team. The room was packed tight with demanding journalists from every major global news network. Camera flashes fired like blinding strobe lights. The energy was electric, bordering on highly hostile. But the very moment the president stepped up to the podium and began to speak, the entire chaotic room fell completely silent. I stood in the shadows with my arms crossed, watching the live broadcast monitors mounted on the wall. The president delivered my words with absolute flawless conviction. Every deliberate pause, every sharp emphasis, every carefully chosen adjective was mine. I watched the breaking news tickers on CNN, Fox, and MSNBC simultaneously update to reflect my exact new narrative. Within 60 seconds, the global markets responded favorably. The looming political disaster evaporated into thin air. The crisis was officially dead. As the intense briefing concluded, I looked down at my pocket where my silenced phone lay hidden. A cold, silent vow solidified firmly in my mind. My mother, my father, Brittany, and Jamal had spent their entire lives treating me like absolute garbage. They honestly believed I was a lowly government clerk, working a dead-end job because I never bragged or flaunted my massive success. They truly thought their country club dinners and leased luxury cars made them elite. They had absolutely no idea that I held the very keys to the kingdom they were so desperately trying to enter. Jamal was currently begging local politicians for minor favors, hoping to build a pathetic state senate campaign. He was obsessed with networking and frantic social climbing. I did not need to network. The powerful people Jamal idolized worked directly for the people who relied heavily on me. I realized then that trying to explain my immense worth to my toxic family was a complete waste of precious time. They did not respect honesty or hard work. They only respected raw power. And they were about to find out exactly how much absolute power I wielded. I was not going to crash their stupid engagement party. I was not going to send an angry email or demand a fake apology. I was going to let them enjoy their fake little aristocratic fantasy in Oak Cliff. I was going to let Jamal boast to his small-town donors. I was going to let my foolish parents drain their retirement accounts to fund Brittany delusional demands. I would stay completely silent and let them dig their own graves. I had work. I had work to do. It is Saturday night in the capital, and the city outside is completely dark, but the West Wing is blazing with fluorescent light and frantic energy. I am currently 24 hours into a grueling 36-hour shift. Congress is threatening a massive government shutdown over a bitterly partisan budget dispute. My entire communications team is running purely on black coffee and adrenaline. We are drafting endless contingency statements, coordinating directly with furious agency heads, and preparing the president for a potential primetime emergency address. The pressure is absolutely crushing, but this is exactly where I thrive. I am orchestrating the messaging for federal agencies, ensuring that panic does not consume the financial markets when they open on Monday morning. Around midnight, my brain finally demands a brief pause. My vision is blurring from staring at dual secure monitors for 12 straight hours. I rub my tired eyes and step out of the high-stakes chaos into a quiet break room down the narrow hall. The room is completely empty except for the low hum of a massive industrial coffee machine. I pour myself a steaming cup of dark roast, leaning heavily against the cool granite counter to take the weight off my aching feet. I have exactly 10 minutes before the Chief of Staff needs my final review on the newly drafted press packet. I pull my personal phone from my tailored blazer pocket. It has remained on silent for 2 entire days. I have completely ignored the toxic group chat, refusing to give them the reaction they desperately crave. Out of sheer morbid curiosity, I open the Instagram app. The algorithm immediately pushes a bright flashing icon to the absolute top of my screen. Brittany is broadcasting live. She has been streaming for over 40 minutes. The engagement party in Oak Cliff, Virginia is currently in full swing. I tap the screen and the loud thumping bass of club music fills the quiet break room. The visual assault of the party is immediate and completely overwhelming. My parents have apparently rented out the grand ballroom of the Oak Cliff Country Club. The massive room is dripping with ostentatious, completely unnecessary luxury. Massive walls of imported white roses flank the grand entrance. A towering 5-tier champagne fountain dominates the center of the polished dance floor. A 10-piece string quartet is playing classical music in the background, attempting to add an air of sophistication to the chaotic room. The entire setup screams of desperate new money trying incredibly hard to prove its worth to anyone who will watch. I know my parents' finances intimately. My father, Richard, works as a mid-level regional manager at a commercial logistics firm. My mother, Diane, is a retired substitute teacher. They absolutely do not have the liquid cash for a party that easily costs upwards of $80,000. They have completely maxed out their credit cards and likely drained what little remained of their modest retirement savings just to afford this ridiculous spectacle. They are burying themselves in massive, insurmountable debt simply to impress Jamal and his circle of wealthy political friends. They are trading their future financial security for one single night of fake aristocratic glory. The camera pans rapidly around the crowded room. Brittany is wearing a custom designer gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals that reflect the flashing event lights. She is holding her phone high, posing and pouting for the camera, her massive diamond ring practically blinding the lens. Beside her stands Jamal, looking incredibly smug in a tailored velvet tuxedo. He is holding a heavy crystal glass of expensive scotch, surveying the crowded room like a triumphant king inspecting his loyal domain. He is clearly reveling in the glorious fact that my foolish parents have essentially bankrupted themselves to honor him. The exclusive guest list is exactly what Brittany had boasted about in her cruel text messages. It is a desperate collection of local municipal politicians, low-level real estate tycoons, and minor campaign donors. These are the exact people Jamal desperately needs to fund his upcoming state senate campaign. He is using my family money to host his own personal political fundraiser. My parents are happily footing the massive bill because they genuinely believe Jamal is their golden ticket to high society. They are completely blinded by his fake charm and his boastful promises of future political power. I watch as my mother walks into the camera frame. She is wearing a heavily sequined dress that looks incredibly tight and uncomfortable. She grabs Brittany by the arm and smiles brightly into the camera, holding up her expensive champagne glass. "We are having the most magical night," Diane shouts loudly over the thumping music. "We have the best family, the best friends, and the perfect future son-in-law right here." She leans in and kisses Jamal on the cheek. He accepts the maternal affection with a patronizing pat on her shoulder. The display of blatant sycophancy makes my stomach turn. I take a slow sip of my bitter coffee, the harsh reality of my situation contrasting sharply with the digital circus playing out on my screen. I am sitting in a highly secure federal facility actively working to prevent the United States government from collapsing into total administrative failure. I am surrounded by genuine national power, absolute global influence, and monumental responsibility. Meanwhile, my family is thousands of miles away, pretending to be wealthy royalty in a rented ballroom funded by predatory credit card loans. They excluded me because they truly thought my presence would somehow ruin their pristine elite facade. They honestly believed my modest wardrobe and quiet demeanor would embarrass them in front of local county officials and minor real estate developers. They were profoundly wrong about me, but I would happily let them keep dreaming for right now, because the harsh truth was going to hit them harder than anything they could have ever possibly imagined tonight. The screen on my phone flickers as Brittany moves through the crowded ballroom, her camera capturing every glittering detail of her lavish event. She stops near the massive champagne fountain, where my father Richard is holding court with a group of older relatives. I immediately recognize my Aunt Susan standing in the circle holding a plate of expensive hors d'oeuvres. Susan has always been the family busybody, and right on cue she leans in close to the camera. The audio picks up her sharp voice over the thumping background music. "Where is your sister tonight?" she asks, scanning the room behind Brittany. "I thought Alyssa would surely be here to celebrate with you." I hold my breath, waiting for my sister to deliver whatever carefully rehearsed lie she has prepared. But before Brittany can open her mouth, my father steps directly in front of the camera lens. He straightens his tuxedo jacket and puffs out his chest, making sure he has the absolute full attention of everyone in the immediate circle. He speaks loudly, projecting his voice so that even the nearby politicians and wealthy donors can hear his response clearly. "Alyssa could not make it," he announces with a heavy, dramatic sigh. "She is struggling right now with her little clerical job up in the city. You know how she is, Susan. She has always been a complete mess, unable to keep her life organized or maintain proper priorities. We tried to help her, but some people just refuse to elevate themselves." My blood runs completely cold as I watch my own father tear me down for absolute sport. He shakes his head, feigning deep parental disappointment, while actively destroying my reputation in front of a live digital audience. He reaches out and firmly grabs Jamal by the shoulder, pulling the tall African-American real estate developer into the center of the camera frame. "But thank God we have Brittany and Jamal here to carry the family legacy forward," my father proclaims, his voice dripping with sycophantic pride. "They are building a real empire. They represent the true future of this family." Jamal chuckles, wrapping his arm tightly around my sister's waist. He flashes a brilliant, perfectly practiced political smile directly at the camera. He looks incredibly arrogant, soaking up my father's unearned praise like a sponge. "Well, we all have to play our parts, Richard," Jamal says, his voice smooth and deeply patronizing. "Some of us are just built to lead and handle the heavy lifting, while others are meant to stay in the background. We wish Alyssa the best with her paperwork, but tonight is about building real power and celebrating success." Brittany giggles, leaning her head against his shoulder, while my father beams at them both with absolute adoration. They clink their crystal glasses together, a toast to their own manufactured greatness and my supposed pathetic failure. I sit alone in the quiet break room of the West Wing, staring at the frozen image of their mocking smiles. The sheer audacity of their public smear campaign leaves me momentarily breathless. They are publicly humiliating me to purchase social currency with a room full of minor local elites. My father is eagerly serving me up on a silver platter just to inflate Jamal's massive ego and secure my sister place in his pretentious world. A hot, intense rage begins to burn in my chest, replacing the lingering exhaustion of my 36-hour shift. I close my eyes, and vivid memories from my youth rush forward completely uninvited. I remember being 19 years old, dragging myself home at 2 in the morning. I was working 3 consecutive minimum wage jobs to afford my university tuition. I scrubbed diner floors, filed endless administrative papers, and tutored failing students just to afford basic groceries and textbooks. I practically starved myself to avoid taking out predatory student loans. That exact same year, my parents proudly presented Brittany with a brand new luxury sedan for passing her basic high school classes. They completely emptied the college savings account that was supposedly meant for both of us and blew every single cent on her car and her expensive pageant coaches. When I begged them for a simple $100 loan to buy a required economics textbook, my mother laughed in my face and told me that successful people figure things out on their own. They never gave me a single dollar. They never attended a single one of my academic award ceremonies. They never once asked about my brutal work schedule or my deteriorating health. They simply labeled me a quiet, boring burden and focused all their time, energy, and financial resources on turning Brittany into a polished trophy wife. And now, after I had literally built myself from absolute nothing into a woman advising the leader of the free world, they had the nerve to call me a struggling mess. They had the utter audacity to claim I was a clerical failure while they drowned in credit card debt to impress a wannabe politician. Jamal's arrogant smirk burns into my memory. He truly believes he is the undisputed king of Oak Cliff. He thinks he is a powerful master of the universe because he managed to lease a nice car and convince my foolish parents to bankrupt themselves for his party. He looks down on me because my family told him I was a worthless paper pusher. He uses my fake failure to elevate his own fragile ego. The rage inside me does not explode. It does not make me want to scream or throw my phone across the room. Instead, it condenses. It hardens into something incredibly sharp and absolutely lethal. I watch the live stream for 10 seconds, memorizing the faces of every person laughing at my father's cruel joke. I take a mental inventory of everything they are proudly showing off because I know exactly how fast it is all going to disappear. I close the app and slide my phone away completely. I cannot let it go. A morbid fascination pulls me back. I unlock the screen and tap the application open just in time to see the camera angle shift wildly. Brittany hands the phone to a bridesmaid, instructing her to keep recording the party. The lens focuses entirely on Jamal. He has cornered Mayor Higgins, an aging politician who holds minor sway in the Oak Cliff district. Jamal traps the older man near the ice sculpture, leaning in with an aggressive posture. I turn up the volume. "You know," Mayor Jamal says, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "I am heading to Washington, D.C. early next month. I have high-level meetings lined up with the senatorial committee. We are laying the groundwork for my state Senate run, and my advisors are extremely optimistic. They tell me my specific background in real estate is exactly what the party needs right now. I have deep connections pulling strings for me on Capitol Hill. We are talking exclusive access." Mayor Higgins nods politely, but looks visibly uncomfortable, trapped by Jamal's relentless networking. "That sounds very promising," Jamal, the mayor, replies, offering a tight practice smile. "Washington is a tough crowd to break into." "Not when you have the right people in your corner," Jamal counters, taking a sip of his drink. "It is all about who you know. I have private dinners scheduled with some major players, the kind of people who write the policy. You and I should really sit down next week, Mayor. I can show you how my upcoming campaign will directly benefit your zoning initiatives here in Oak Cliff. My political action committee is already gaining serious traction." I sit in the break room of the West Wing listening to this absolute garbage. The suffocating irony of his desperate lies makes me physically nauseous. Jamal is standing in a rented suburban country club, blatantly lying to a small-town mayor about having elite connections. He is dropping vague buzzwords like committee and policy to sound important. He genuinely believes that hosting a flashy party will somehow bribe his way into the most exclusive political inner circles. He thinks he can fake his way into the exact rooms where I am standing. The people Jamal is desperately trying to impress are the exact same people I brief every single morning. The senators he dreams of meeting at private dinners are the ones calling my secure line at 3 in the morning, begging for crisis management strategies. I am the gatekeeper to the very world he is trying to buy his way into. Yet he stands there in a tuxedo paid for by my parents' credit cards, acting like he is already a political mastermind, while simultaneously mocking my career as a clerical joke. I press the side buttons on my phone and take a clean, high-resolution screenshot of the live stream. I capture Jamal's arrogant face as he lectures the trapped mayor. I want to preserve this exact moment. I want a digital record of his supreme overconfidence. Looking at the captured image, the entire toxic dynamic of my family suddenly becomes crystal clear. It is a pathetic parasitic ecosystem built entirely on mutual exploitation. Jamal is using my parents. He needs their pristine suburban image and willingness to go into massive debt to fund his political theater. He is draining their finances to host a campaign rally disguised as an engagement party. In return, my parents are eagerly using Jamal. They are desperate for social status and view his aggressive ambition as their personal ticket to the local aristocracy. They want to be the proud parents of a state senator. They want to brag to their country club friends about their wealthy son-in-law. They will bankrupt themselves to purchase that illusion. And right in the middle of their transactional relationship sits me. I am the designated punching bag for both parties. My parents use my supposed failure to highlight Brittany's success. Jamal uses my modest government job to make his own fake career look more impressive. They bond over their mutual disdain for me. Tearing me down is the glue that holds their fragile alliance together. They need me to be a failure because my perceived weakness makes them feel strong. But their entire foundation is a massive lie. My parents have no real money. Jamal has no real connections. Brittany has no real accomplishments. They are all just playing an expensive game of dress-up. I am the only one holding any actual power, and I earned every single ounce of it through relentless, grueling work. I did not buy my way into the room. I fought for it. I stare at the screenshot one last time. The anger in my chest morphs into cold, calculated anticipation. Jamal wants to play politics. My parents want to play high society. They are about to discover that Washington politics is a blood sport, and they are completely unarmed. I do not need to crash their party to destroy their illusions. I just need to let the natural consequences of their own arrogance catch up to them. I finish every last drop of my bitter coffee. The 10-minute coffee break is over. The temporary distraction of my family and their pathetic suburban drama fades as the heavy reality of my actual responsibilities settles back onto my shoulders. I toss the empty paper cup into the recycling bin and straighten my blazer. I pick up my phone and slide it back into my pocket, leaving the live stream running silently in the background. I walk out of the break room and head straight down the polished corridor. The chief of staff is waiting for my final review. I push open the heavy door, ready to get back to work. I have a nation to protect. Let Jamal enjoy his rented ballroom and his fake connections for now. His political aspirations are built entirely on sinking sand, and the tide is coming in. By the time Monday morning arrived, the brutal weekend had completely transformed into a historic triumph. We dismantled the opposition arguments and forced a bipartisan agreement that the media praised as a masterclass in political maneuvering. I had not slept more than 4 hours total since Friday. My suit was rumpled, my voice was hoarse, and I was running entirely on adrenaline and sheer willpower. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of intense victory that only comes from staring down a massive national disaster and winning. I reached my office and dropped my heavy leather portfolio onto my desk. My desk phone immediately rang. The chief of staff wanted to see me. I did not ask questions. A summons from the chief of staff meant you dropped absolutely everything and moved. I quickly smoothed out my blazer, took a deep breath to mask my exhaustion, and walked directly to his office. The chief of staff office is an intimidating space designed to project absolute authority. He was standing by his massive window looking out over the rose garden. He turned around as the heavy door clicked shut behind me. In fact, he looked incredibly pleased. "Have a seat, Alyssa," he said. "You did exceptional work this weekend." He began, his voice carrying absolute sincerity. "The president is immensely grateful for your strategy. You saved the administration from a very messy public defeat." "Thank you, sir," I replied. He chuckled. "You do the heavy lifting behind the scenes, but the spotlight always finds the people who actually run this town." He picked up a glossy magazine. He tossed it onto the table between us. The heavy magazine landed with a solid thud. I looked down. It was an advance copy of Time magazine. The red border framed a striking cover. The massive headline across the front read, "The 100 Power Brokers of Washington." "Page 42, he instructed. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the magazine. I flipped through profiles of veteran senators and foreign diplomats. I reached page 42 and my breath caught sharply in my throat. It was a massive centerfold spread. The photograph was stunning. It featured me standing in the center of the Oval Office. I was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, holding my signature leather portfolio, looking directly into the camera with absolute unyielding confidence. The bold text plastered across the top of the photo was impossible to ignore. It read, "Alyssa, the strategic mind behind the nation's survival." I stared at the image, completely speechless. The article accompanying the photo detailed my rapid rise through the brutal ranks of crisis communications. It outlined my instrumental role in managing multiple national security emergencies. The journalist highlighted how I operated in complete secrecy, wielding immense political influence without ever seeking public fame. "The issue officially hits every newsstand and political office across the entire country this coming Friday," he explained. "It will be everywhere, Alyssa. You are about to become a very recognizable figure in this city. The days of operating entirely in the shadows are officially over." I slowly closed the magazine, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Friday. The magazine was dropping on Friday, the exact day Jamal and my family were planning to crash their way into high society. The exact same weekend they were desperately trying to use fake connections to build Jamal's pathetic state senate campaign. They had excluded me from their lavish engagement party just 48 hours ago because they genuinely believed my presence would embarrass their elite guests. They had absolutely no idea that by Friday morning, my face and my actual job title would be plastered across the most widely read political magazine on the planet. They had no idea that the very people Jamal was desperately trying to impress would be reading an article detailing my absolute authority over the federal government. "Are you ready for this level of exposure?" he asked, evaluating my readiness to handle the incoming storm of public attention. I placed the magazine back onto the table, my hands now completely steady. My exhaustion evaporated instantly, replaced by cold, sharp anticipation. I thought about my father's cruel text message. I thought about Brittany wearing her crystal gown paid for by crippling debt. I thought about Jamal smirking into the camera, bragging about his fake political leverage. "I am completely ready, sir," I answered, my voice ringing with undeniable certainty. "Keep that copy," he said. "You earned it. Send a copy to your parents. I am sure they will be proud." I picked up the magazine, clutching it tightly against my chest as I stood up to leave. "Oh, I am sure they will be absolutely speechless," I replied, allowing a tiny, razor-sharp smile to cross my lips. I walked out of the office and headed back down the bustling corridor, holding the physical proof of my immense power. Every step I took felt lighter, as if a massive invisible weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. For years I had allowed their cruel words to dictate my self-worth. I had silently absorbed their constant rejection, convinced that keeping the peace was better than fighting back. But their latest attempt to completely erase me from my own sister engagement party was the final turning point. I no longer cared about preserving our broken family dynamic. They had chosen to mock my career and elevate a man who built his entire personality on arrogant, empty promises. They wanted to pretend they were untouchable elite socialites who were simply too good for me. I was ready to burn their fake empire to the absolute ground. My family wanted to play a high-stakes game of status and influence. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. Friday could not come fast enough. The countdown had officially begun, and Oak Cliff, Virginia was entirely and completely unprepared for the incoming storm. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, cool breeze sweeping across the Potomac River. I woke up at exactly 5 in the morning, not to the sound of a blaring alarm, but to the quiet, rhythmic buzzing of a single notification on my secure tablet. The digital embargo had officially lifted. Time magazine had just hit the servers. Simultaneously, thousands of delivery trucks were dropping physical copies at every major newsstand, airport terminal, and political office across the entire country. My face was now staring back at millions of early morning commuters. I got out of bed and walked over to my kitchen counter, where the advance copy still rested exactly where I had placed it on Monday. I brewed a strong cup of black coffee and sat in absolute silence, watching the sun slowly rise over the monuments. I did not rush to check my personal phone. I did not log onto social media to read the immediate reactions. I simply sat there enjoying the profound calm before the inevitable explosion. By 7 in the morning, I was dressed in a sharp, tailored burgundy suit and walking through the heavy security gates of the West Wing. The atmosphere in the corridors had palpably shifted. Secret Service agents who usually offered a silent, stoic nod were now offering warm smiles and quiet words of congratulations. Senior aides stopped me in the hallway, holding their own copies of the magazine, asking if I would sign the glossy cover. I handled the sudden influx of attention with the same calm precision I applied to a national crisis. I offered polite thanks, deflected the praise back to my incredible communications team, and kept moving toward my office. I knew the real storm was brewing several hundred miles away in the pretentious suburban enclave of Oak Cliff, Virginia. Oak Cliff was a town that ran entirely on social currency and gossip. Everyone wanted to know exactly who was connected to whom. Jamal had spent the last 6 months aggressively cultivating an image of a well-connected political insider. He had spent my parents' money to host a flashy engagement party, inviting local mayors and regional donors, promising them exclusive access to the Washington elite. He had built a massive house of cards entirely on the premise that he was the most important person in the room. I could easily picture the exact moment his fragile illusion began to shatter. Local politicians love to stay informed on federal power dynamics. By 8 in the morning, those same wealthy donors and mayors were undoubtedly opening their freshly delivered copies of Time magazine over their morning coffee. They were turning to page 42 and seeing the familiar last name. They were looking at my face, the woman Jamal and my family had deliberately excluded and actively mocked just a few days prior. They were reading the bold print, declaring me the strategic mind behind the survival of the nation. My personal phone began to vibrate inside my desk drawer at exactly 8:15. I did not reach for it. I let it vibrate against the wood. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then it started ringing continuously, a relentless electronic demand for my immediate attention. I simply opened my bottom desk drawer, looked at the glowing screen, and flipped the device face down. I shut the heavy wooden drawer with a loud, satisfying click. I had decided earlier that week to enforce a strict 4-hour communications blackout. I was going to let the absolute silence build the psychological tension to an unbearable breaking point. Silence is often the most devastating weapon you can wield against narcissists. People like my parents and my sister thrive on immediate emotional reactions. They desperately need to know that their actions are affecting you. When you deny them a response, you deny them their power. By completely ignoring their frantic calls, I was starving them of the control they craved. Every unanswered ring was a sharp reminder that they were no longer dealing with the timid, obedient daughter they used to bully. They were trying to summon a high-ranking federal official who was entirely too busy running the country to care about their pathetic suburban panic. I focused completely on my work drafting policy memos and coordinating afternoon press briefings. Yet in the back of my mind, I was calculating their escalating panic. The first hour of my silence probably sparked deep confusion in Oak Cliff. My mother likely assumed I was just asleep or ignoring her out of petty spite. By the second hour, that confusion undoubtedly morphed into creeping anxiety. Jamal was probably receiving confused text messages from his wealthy donors, asking why he never mentioned that his sister-in-law essentially ran the crisis division of the White House. By the third hour, the anxiety would have escalated into full-blown terror. They were realizing that they had publicly humiliated a woman who held more political leverage in her left pinky finger than Jamal could ever hope to achieve. As the fourth hour of my self-imposed blackout approached, the sheer volume of incoming calls began to override my phone notification limits. The muffled vibrating sound from my desk drawer became a continuous, unbroken hum. They were completely losing their minds. Brittany was likely screaming at my parents. My father was probably pacing the hardwood floors of his house, realizing his wealthy country club friends were currently reading about the daughter he had just publicly called a struggling mess. Jamal was inevitably watching his fake political credibility disintegrate right before his eyes. His donors were smart people. They would instantly realize that if Jamal truly had the elite Washington connections he bragged about, he would have proudly paraded me around his engagement party. My complete absence proved he was a total fraud. The clock on my office wall finally struck noon. 4 hours of agonizing silence had passed. The stage was set. I had let them marinate in their own panic long enough. They were completely disarmed, stripped of their arrogant confidence, and drowning in the severe consequences of their own actions. I slowly pulled out the desk drawer and picked up my phone. The cracked screen was flooded with notifications. There were 37 missed calls from Brittany, 22 from my mother, and 15 from my father. There was also a staggering barrage of frantic text messages pleading for me to pick up immediately. I unlocked the screen and took a slow, deep breath, savoring the incredible feeling of total control. I navigated to my call log and tapped the most recent missed call from my sister. I lifted the phone to my ear and listened to the steady dial tone, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The line barely clicked over to an active connection before the screaming began. Brittany answered on the first fraction of a ring, her voice frantic and pitching at an octave that forced me to pull the phone away from my ear. "How could you do this to our family?" Brittany shrieked. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "How could you be so vicious, Alyssa? You planned this entire thing just to ruin my perfect weekend." I leaned back, swiveling to look out at the Washington Monument. I kept my tone level and devoid of emotional warmth. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Brittany. I simply took your excellent advice." I stayed out of sight and took an Uber. "Do not play games with me," she screamed. "You are on the cover of Time magazine. You are plastered across every single newsstand in Oak Cliff. My friends are texting me pictures of your face from the airport. Jamal donors are blowing up his phone right now asking why the deputy director of crisis communications was not at his party. You completely humiliated us." "I humiliated you?" I asked, taking a slow sip of water. "That is a fascinating perspective." "You hid your wealth from us," Brittany accused, her voice dripping with venom. "You hid your power. You sat there for years letting us think you were a struggling paper pusher. You knew I needed $10,000 for my engagement dress, and you lied about having your money tied up in investments. You probably make a massive salary and wanted to watch me suffer. You did this to deliberately upstage my engagement." I let a heavy silence stretch over the line. I wanted her to hear the ridiculousness of her own words. She genuinely believed my grueling career in the federal government working 36-hour shifts was an elaborate scheme designed exclusively to overshadow her suburban party. The sheer magnitude of her narcissism was impressive. "Brittany," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I never hid my job from anyone. I have worked in the West Wing for 5 years. I never lied to you about my career. You and our parents simply never bothered to ask what I actually did. You assumed I was a failure because I do not wear crystal gowns or lease cars I cannot afford. You projected your shallow insecurities onto me, and I chose not to correct you." "You should have told us," she sobbed, trying to shift into the role of the victim. "If we had known you were this important, we would have treated you differently." "That is exactly the point," I fired back. "You should not need a magazine cover to treat your sister with basic human respect. You told me I was too socially awkward to fit in with Jamal's elite crowd. Now you are upset because you realize the crowd you are trying to impress works for the people who rely on me." "Jamal is freaking out," she cried. He spent the entire weekend bragging to local real estate investors about his high-level political connections. He told them he had exclusive access to Washington. Then this morning, those exact same investors woke up and saw your face on the newsstand. They are calling him non-stop. They are demanding to know why his own sister-in-law was not at his VIP event. That sounds like a terrible crisis, I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. Perhaps Jamal should hire a crisis communications expert to handle his failing local reputation. This is not a joke, Brittany shrieked. They are asking him if he is a fraud. They are wondering why the woman running the White House press room was not standing next to him. You made him look like a liar. His entire campaign is built on the illusion of power, and you destroyed it by ignoring us. I did not destroy anything, I corrected firmly. Jamal destroyed his credibility by lying to his donors. Our father destroyed his by publicly announcing I was a struggling mess at your party. You destroyed yours by telling me I was unfit for your table. The truth simply caught up with all of you faster than expected. We had to protect our image, she pleaded desperately. You do not understand how things work in Oak Cliff. Jamal needs these people to fund his campaign. We needed to project absolute success. And you thought tearing me down was the best way to build yourselves up, I asked. You bankrupted Mom and Dad to throw a party you could not afford to impress people who do not care about you. Now you are facing the consequences. You have to fix this, Alyssa, Brittany demanded, shifting from victimhood back to entitlement. You have to issue a statement or post something on social media. Tell everyone there was a family emergency and that is why you missed the party. Tell them Jamal is a close confidant. You owe us. I actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed brightly in my secure office. I owe you absolutely nothing, Brittany. I am not going to issue a fake press release to save your fiancé's pathetic local campaign. I will not cover up your cruelty. You wanted a high society life without me. Congratulations, you have it. You are a monster, she spat, venom dripping from every syllable. You are deliberately trying to destroy your own family. I am not destroying anything, I said, my voice freezing over completely. I am just refusing to be your protective shield anymore. Let Jamal explain his lies to his donors. Let Dad explain his jokes. I have a country to run. Before she could scream another insult, I heard a scuffling sound on the other end of the line. A deep, heavy voice suddenly overpowered the audio. The phone had clearly been snatched directly out of my sister's own trembling hands by someone who was extremely furious. Alyssa, sweetheart, is that you? The voice belonged to my father. Richard had clearly wrested the device away from my hysterical sister. His tone was a jarring whiplash from the cruel, dismissive texts he had sent me just a few days ago. He was employing his best corporate manager voice, a sickeningly smooth cadence designed to placate angry clients and smooth over massive errors. It is me, Dad, I replied, my voice completely flat. Darling, we are just so incredibly proud of you. My mother. Diane suddenly chimed in. She was leaning close to the speakerphone. Her voice dripped with an artificial, sugary warmth that made my skin crawl. We just picked up a copy of the magazine at the grocery store. Seeing our brilliant, beautiful daughter standing right there in the Oval Office, it just took our breath away. You look absolutely stunning in that suit. I sat in my chair staring at the ceiling. The sheer, unadulterated whiplash of their behavior was breathtaking. Less than a week ago, Diane had explicitly called me a disappointment working a dead-end job. She had told me to hide in a cheap spa so I would not ruin their elite aesthetic. Now, because my face was attached to raw national power, I was suddenly their brilliant, beautiful daughter. Save the performance, Mom, I said, cutting sharply through her fake maternal affection. I do not buy it, and neither do you. You are only proud of me because you think my title gives you something new to brag about at the country club. That is highly unfair, Alyssa Richard interjected, adopting a tone of wounded parental dignity. We have always supported your career. We just wanted you to be happy. You supported my career, I echoed, allowing a harsh laugh to escape my lips. Dad, you literally told me on Tuesday that there was no room for me at the engagement party. You told Aunt Susan on a public live stream that I was a struggling mess with a clerical job. Do not pretend you suddenly respect me. The line went dead silent for a long, uncomfortable moment. They clearly had no idea I had watched the live stream of their party. The realization that I had witnessed their public betrayal firsthand temporarily robbed them of their rehearsed script. They could not charm their way out of undeniable video evidence. When they finally spoke again, the sickly sweet facade evaporated completely, instantly replaced by their preferred tactic of aggressive victimhood. "Well, whose fault is that?" Diane snapped, her true venomous nature bleeding back into the conversation. "Why did you lie to us, Alyssa? Why did you hide this massive promotion from your own family? You deliberately kept us in the dark just to humiliate us." "I never lied to you," I replied, my voice dropping to an icy register. "I never hid a single thing. You simply never cared enough to ask." "You told us you work in government communications," Richard argued defensively. "You made it sound like you were formatting newsletters for some boring federal agency. You never once mentioned that you advised the president or ran the crisis division. You made us look like complete idiots in front of the state politicians. You actively sabotaged our networking opportunities by staying silent." "No, Dad," I corrected him sharply. "You made yourselves look like idiots. You assumed I was formatting newsletters because it fit the pathetic narrative you created for me. You needed me to be a failure so you could feel better about bankrupting yourselves for Brittany. You never asked what my actual job title was. You never asked about my daily responsibilities. Every time I tried to talk about my life in Washington, you interrupted me to brag about Jamal leased car or Brittany new dress." "We were just protecting your sister," Diane cried out, playing the victim card with practiced ease. "You have always been so independent, Alyssa. Brittany needs our help. She is sensitive. You are so cold and unfeeling. And now you have completely ruined the most important week of her life. Jamal investors are threatening to pull their funding because you made him look like a liar." "Jamal is a liar," I stated plainly. "He told his donors he had elite Washington connections. He does not. He told the local mayor he was dining with policymakers. He is not. He used my fake failure to make himself look powerful. The only reason he is panicking right now is because his donors realized he has absolutely no relationship with the one person in this family who actually holds real political influence." "You are destroying our family reputation," Richard yelled, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "Do you have any idea how much money we borrowed for that party? We invited the mayor. We invited the zoning commissioner. We told them our family was a political powerhouse. Now they are calling us asking why we lied about your career. They think we are frauds." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I fired back, refusing to back down a single inch. "I am protecting the institution I serve from opportunistic leeches. You wanted a high society life. You wanted to play the elite political game. Well, welcome to the major leagues. In this game, nobody cares about your rented ballroom or your fake connections. They only care about results, and right now, you have absolutely none." Before my father could launch into another desperate tirade, the background noise on the call shifted aggressively. I heard a deep, heavy sigh and the sound of a hand slapping against a hard surface. The phone was being wrestled away again. The frantic pleading of my parents was suddenly muted. The next voice that came through the speaker was not Richard or Diane. It was Jamal. His smooth, arrogant politician voice had been completely stripped away, replaced by an urgent, demanding tone that told me he was finally realizing the severe danger he was in. Section 11, 1,000 words. "Listen to me, Alyssa." Jamal spoke with a heavy, authoritative cadence that demanded immediate submission. Gone was the patronizing chuckle he used to dismiss me at family dinners. Gone was the fake brotherly warmth he projected during his carefully staged photo opportunities. This was the voice of a man cornered by his own hubris, trying desperately to negotiate his way out of a rapidly collapsing building. "I am listening, Jamal," I replied, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the polished mahogany of my desk. "I am absolutely fascinated to hear what you could possibly have to say right now." "Let us cut the nonsense and deal with the reality of the situation," he commanded, ignoring my sarcasm entirely. "The magazine cover was a nice stunt. You caught us off guard. I will give you credit for the shock value, but right now my major donors are holding their checkbooks hostage. They saw the article. They know you are the Deputy Director of Crisis Communications. They are demanding proof my Washington connections are legitimate. If I do not deliver that proof by the end of the week, my campaign is now completely dead. I fail to see how your failing campaign is my crisis to manage, I responded, keeping my voice devoid of any emotion. You built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. The wind simply blew it over. Do not play coy with me, Alyssa. Jamal snapped, his frustration bleeding through his polished exterior. You know how this game is played. You operate in the absolute highest political circles in the entire country. You have the leverage I need, and I have the local political machinery that can benefit you later. We are family now. We need to protect our mutual interests. You cannot just walk away from us. We do not ever have mutual interests, Jamal, I corrected him sharply. You have a desperate need for validation and I have a country to run. Those two things do not intersect. Here is what is going to happen, he stated, his voice vibrating with absolute entitlement. There is a political action gala happening at the Ritz-Carlton in D.C. this Friday night. I know you have VIP access. I know Senator Harrison is going to be the keynote speaker. You are going to get 4 all-access VIP passes for me, Brittany, Richard, and Diane. You will get us past the security checkpoints, and you will seat us directly at your table. I sat in my office completely stunned by the sheer magnitude of his audacity. He was not asking for a favor, he was issuing a direct order. He genuinely believed that because he was marrying my sister, I was somehow obligated to hand over my hard-earned political capital to save his fraudulent career. You want me to bring you to the most exclusive political event of the year? I asked, making sure I was hearing his delusional demands correctly. Yes, Jamal answered without a single ounce of hesitation. And you are going to personally introduce me to Senator Harrison. You wrote his survival speech this weekend. He owes you a massive favor. You are going to cash in that favor and secure his formal endorsement for my state Senate run. When my donors see me shaking hands with Senator Harrison at a VIP gala, they will double their contributions. This is a simple transactional favor, Alyssa. You fix this for me, and I will ensure your parents stop bothering you about your past. The raw transactional nature of his demand was nauseating. He was openly offering to call off my abusive parents if I prostituted my political influence to serve his ego. He thought he could buy my cooperation with the promise of basic family decency. You honestly believe you can command me to do this? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, chilling register. After you stood in a country club and laughed while my father called me a struggling mess. After you watched your fiancé tell me I was too socially awkward to attend your engagement party. After you drained my parents' own retirement accounts to fund your fake elite lifestyle. That was business, Alyssa, Jamal argued, his tone entirely dismissive. We had to project a certain image to secure the initial funding. You did not fit the aesthetic we needed for that specific local crowd. Do not take it personally. This is how the real world operates. You have to be ruthless to gain power. Now it is your turn to step up for the family legacy. Put your petty feelings aside and do what needs to be done. My petty feelings, I repeated, words tasting like ash in my mouth. Yes, your petty feelings, Jamal reiterated, raising his voice to reassert his dominance. You are acting like a bitter child. Grow up, Alyssa. I need those tickets by tomorrow morning. I need Senator Harrison itinerary, and I need you to brief me on his current policy position so I can impress him at the gala. Do not fail me on this. I looked at the framed photograph of the White House on my office wall. I thought about the thousands of hours I had sacrificed to earn my seat at the table. I thought about the sheer disrespect radiating from the man on the other end of the line. He wanted to bypass the struggle and walk straight into the high halls of power on my back. I took a slow, deep breath. The anger vanished entirely, replaced by a profound, absolute calm. I had given them every opportunity to show a shred of humanity, and they had chosen arrogance every single time. Jamal, I said, my voice ringing with total, uncompromising authority, listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once. The line went dead quiet. He was waiting for my compliance. Sorry, Jamal, the guest list is final, and frankly you aren't socially fit for my table. Before he could utter a syllable of protest, I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red button. The call disconnected instantly. I immediately navigated to my phone settings and blocked his number. I immediately blocked Brittany. I blocked Diane. I blocked Richard. I severed every digital tie connecting me to Oak Cliff, Virginia. The silence that filled my office was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute total control. Let them try to crash the gates of Washington. I would be waiting. Saturday night arrived with the kind of electric energy that only Washington, D.C. can generate. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was transformed into a fortress of absolute political power. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer evening gowns. This was the Political Action Gala, the most exclusive event of the season. The room was packed tight with cabinet secretaries, multinational tech CEOs, and top-tier media executives. The air hummed with the quiet, intense murmurs of backroom deals being negotiated over glasses of vintage champagne. I stood near the center of the room, completely in my element. I wore a floor-length emerald green gown that commanded attention without screaming for it. For the past 2 hours, I had been navigating the complex web of political alliances with absolute precision. A prominent tech billionaire approached me, hoping to schedule a private briefing regarding the upcoming infrastructure rollout. I gave him exactly 2 minutes of my time before smoothly pivoting the conversation to a waiting foreign diplomat. The level of respect I received was intoxicating but entirely earned. Nobody here cared about local country club memberships or leased luxury cars. They cared about influence, and everyone in this room knew exactly how much influence I wielded. I caught the eye of the White House Chief of Staff across the room. He raised his glass in a silent toast, acknowledging my flawless orchestration of the week earlier crisis. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, feeling a profound sense of belonging. This was my world. I had built my place in it brick by grueling brick. The security protocols for tonight were absolute. You did not simply walk into a room containing a third of the presidential cabinet and a dozen high-ranking senators. The perimeter was secured by armed Secret Service agents, local law enforcement, and private hotel security. Every single guest had undergone rigorous background checks weeks in advance. The idea of anyone crashing this event was completely laughable. Suddenly, the discreet, clear earpiece tucked into my right ear crackled to life. I tapped the small communication device, instantly shifting from polite gala guest to high-alert crisis manager. Deputy Director, we have a developing situation at the main security perimeter. The voice belonged to Agent Miller, the lead security coordinator for the event. His tone was professional, but edged with distinct annoyance. "Go ahead, Miller," I replied, stepping away from a conversation with the Secretary of Defense and moving toward a quiet alcove near the velvet-draped walls. "We have 4 individuals causing a massive disturbance in the front lobby," he reported. 2 older adults, 1 younger female, and an African-American male. They do not have VIP credentials. They are not on any approved guest list. They are currently shouting at the venue staff and attempting to physically bypass the velvet ropes. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of my family was staggering. They had actually done it. They had driven all the way from Oak Cliff, Virginia, to crash the most heavily guarded political event in the nation. They honestly believed their suburban entitlement would somehow override federal security protocols. "What exactly are they saying, Miller?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "The younger male is being highly aggressive," Agent Miller continued. "He keeps flashing a local real estate business card and demanding to see Senator Harrison. The older female is screaming at the concierge, claiming she is your mother and that you personally invited them to sit at your table. They are causing a huge scene, Deputy Director. The local press corps stationed in the lobby is starting to take photos of the altercation. Should we have local law enforcement detain them for trespassing?" My mind calculated the variables with lightning speed. Having them arrested would create a messy public spectacle that could easily reflect poorly on the administration. Letting them inside was absolutely out of the question. Jamal was desperately trying to force my hand, attempting to create a public scene so uncomfortable that I would have to let him in just to quiet them down. He was using the exact same emotional blackmail tactics my parents had used my entire life. He thought if they made enough noise, I would eventually fold and give him the political access he craved. He was profoundly mistaken. "Hold your position, Miller," I commanded. "Do not let them take a single step past the main security checkpoint. I am coming out to the lobby right now. I will handle this situation personally." "Copy that, Deputy Director," Agent Miller replied. "We will maintain the perimeter." I lowered my hand from my ear and took a slow, measured breath. The soft, classical music drifting from the stage felt entirely detached from the burning anger rising in my chest. My family had spent my entire life telling me I was a social liability. They had actively excluded me from their trivial suburban parties because they thought I would embarrass them. And now they had the absolute nerve to show up at my professional domain, uninvited, throwing a public tantrum like spoiled children. I smoothed the front of my emerald gown and began walking toward the grand exit of the ballroom. The heavy wooden doors were guarded by two imposing agents who immediately stepped aside to let me pass. The hallway leading to the main lobby was lined with thick, expensive carpets that completely muffled my footsteps. With every step I took away from the glittering gala, I felt my professional diplomacy slipping away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of status and influence. They wanted to force their way into my world and demand a seat at my table. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to march directly out to that lobby and face them. I was going to look them dead in the eye and deliver a dose of reality so crushing they would never forget it. The time for keeping the peace was officially over. I stepped out from the quiet velvet-draped corridor and into the blinding chaos of the main hotel lobby. The sheer volume of the commotion hit me instantly. A massive crowd of paparazzi and curious onlookers had formed a wide circle near the main security checkpoint. In the dead center of that circle, my family was putting on the most humiliating performance of their lives. They looked absolutely ridiculous. They had clearly gone on a frantic shopping spree to try and look the part of Washington elites, but they failed miserably. Jamal was wearing a garish, bright silver tuxedo jacket with a massive velvet bow tie that screamed cheap reality television. Brittany was stuffed into an overly sequined neon pink ball gown that was entirely inappropriate for a formal political gala. My father wore a poorly tailored suit while my mother was covered in heavy fake jewelry. They were physically pressing themselves against the thick velvet ropes, trying to intimidate two highly trained Secret Service agents who stood like literal stone statues. Jamal was gesturing wildly with a crumpled business card. "I am telling you, I am a major real estate developer in Virginia," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with desperate arrogance. "My sister-in-law is the Deputy Director of Crisis Communications. She is inside right now waiting for me. We are on the VIP guest list. You need to let us through before I make a phone call and have you both fired." The agents did not even blink. "Sir, step back from the perimeter," one agent commanded in a low, lethal tone. "I do not care who you claim to know. You do not have credentials, and you are currently trespassing on a federally secured perimeter. Move back now." My father, Richard, puffed out his chest, trying to channel the authority he used on his regional sales team. "Do you know who we are?" Richard demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the agent. "We are the family of the woman on the cover of Time magazine. We demand basic respect." My mother, Diane, was loudly complaining to anyone with a camera trying to garner sympathy from the flashing press pool. "We drove all the way from Oak Cliff to support our daughter," she cried out, playing the devastated matriarch perfectly. "She is a very important government official, and these guards are treating us like common criminals." The flashing cameras captured every single second of their pathetic breakdown. They thought their suburban tactics of complaining to the manager would actually work on federal security forces. They were completely unhinged. I took a deep breath and walked forward. Agent Miller caught my eye as I approached the perimeter. He gave a subtle nod, preparing to intervene if things got physical. I stepped right up to the velvet rope, standing just inches away from my enraged family. The heavy emerald silk of my gown brushed against the brass stanchions. For a split second, they did not even recognize me. They were too busy screaming at the guards. Then Jamal turned his head and froze. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance, my absolute calm, and the unquestionable authority radiating from the security team surrounding me. Brittany stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open in shock. My parents finally turned around. Diane's eyes immediately lit up with a predatory gleam. She instantly dropped her angry demeanor and slapped on a sickeningly bright smile. She lunged forward against the velvet rope, reaching her arms out toward me. "Sweetheart," Diane shrieked, her voice echoing loudly across the marble lobby. "We came to support you. We are so incredibly proud of our beautiful girl. Tell these ridiculous guards to let your family inside." She tried to reach over the rope to grab my arm, but an agent immediately blocked her path. I did not move a single inch. I looked at her outstretched hands and felt nothing but profound disgust. "You did not come here to support me, Diane," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the ambient noise of the lobby. "You came here because you realized I have power and you want to leech off it. You literally told me 3 days ago that I was a complete disappointment. You told me to hide in a cheap spa so I would not embarrass you in front of Jamal elite friends. Now you are here uninvited." Richard stepped up beside my mother, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. "Alyssa, this is neither the time nor the place for your petty grievances," he hissed, attempting to sound commanding. "The press is watching. You are embarrassing the family legacy. Let us inside right now, and we can discuss this privately over drinks." Brittany grabbed the rope, glaring at my dress with pure, unadulterated jealousy. "You are being completely ridiculous, Alyssa," she whined loudly. "We are your family. Jamal needs to meet the senator tonight for his campaign. You owe us this favor. Stop being so selfish and get us VIP access. You are ruining my entire engagement weekend just because you are jealous of my happiness." The sheer delusion was breathtaking. They were actively causing a national security disturbance and still blaming me for their utter humiliation. I stared directly at Jamal. Jamal adjusted his shiny silver jacket, trying to regain his arrogant political persona. "Alyssa," he said, smoothing his voice into a fake diplomatic tone. "We got off on the wrong foot on the phone earlier. Emotions were high. But we are here now, ready to stand by your side. Just wave us through. I have some major policy proposals I need to discuss with your colleagues inside. It will be mutually beneficial for both of us." He actually winked at me as if we were sharing some secret inside joke. I felt my stomach physically churn at his monumental arrogance. I took a slow breath and prepared to completely destroy his political ambitions right there before the eagerly flashing news cameras. I stepped back a full yard from the velvet rope, putting deliberate physical distance between myself and Jamal. His arrogant wink dissolved into a scowl of genuine frustration. He had expected me to fold under the flashing lights of the press cameras to play the role of the obedient, quiet sister who just wanted to keep the peace. When I did not immediately wave the guards away, he lost whatever tiny shred of composure he had left. Jamal surged forward, pressing his chest aggressively against the thick velvet barrier. He tried to physically intimidate Agent Miller, towering over the stoic security coordinator with absolute false bravado. "Tell them who I am," Jamal barked, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. He abandoned the diplomatic tone entirely and let his true aggressive nature bleed out. "Introduce me to Senator Harrison right now, Alyssa. My political career depends on this. You need to fix this mess and let us inside. Family helps family." The sheer hypocrisy of his demand echoed loudly across the marble lobby. The local reporters and political bloggers stationed near the entrance completely stopped taking photographs and started recording video on their phones. They could smell the impending destruction of a local political candidate, and they were eager to capture every single second of it. I looked at Jamal and let a cold, sharp laugh escape my lips. "Family helps family," I repeated, projecting my voice so that every single microphone in the lobby could pick up my words. "That is incredibly fascinating, Jamal, because just 3 days ago you and my sister told me I was completely socially unfit to attend your engagement party. You told me my presence would be a massive embarrassment to your elite political donors. You explicitly said I was an awkward, underdressed spinster who did not belong at your table. Does any of that sound like family helping family? Brittany's face went completely pale. She grabbed Jamal's arm, trying to pull him back, but he stubbornly planted his feet. You are taking this completely out of context, Alyssa. Brittany whined, her voice trembling as the camera flashes intensified. We were just stressed about the party planning. I shifted my gaze directly to my sister. You were not stressed, Brittany. You were cruel. You demanded $10,000 for a party dress, and when I declined, you and Mother told me I was a complete disappointment. You told me to hide in a cheap spa so I would not ruin your aesthetic. And now you expect me to act as your personal VIP pass to the highest political circles in the nation. It is completely pathetic. My father, Richard, desperately tried to salvage the collapsing situation. Alyssa. Lower your voice. He hissed, his face a blotchy crimson. People are recording this. You are humiliating us in front of the press. You are ruining Jamal's campaign before it even begins. You are acting like an ungrateful child. I am acting like the woman you publicly shamed, I fired back, staring my father dead in the eye. You stood in front of a live camera last night and told your entire suburban country club that I was a struggling mess. You mocked my career. You said I worked a little clerical job and that I was incapable of organizing my own life. You bragged that Jamal and Brittany were the true legacy of this family. If Jamal is such a powerful political mastermind, why is he standing in a hotel lobby begging a struggling paper pusher for a massive favor? The reporters in the lobby began to whisper frantically to one another, furiously typing on their devices. They were capturing every single word. Jamal's political facade was rapidly dissolving into absolute public humiliation. His carefully constructed image of an elite-connected insider was being systematically dismantled by the very person he had tried to exploit. "This is not fair," Jamal yelled, slamming his hand onto the brass stanchion. The Secret Service agents immediately shifted their stance, placing their hands near their holsters. Jamal quickly backed off, but his eyes were wild with desperate panic. You are twisting the narrative, Alyssa. I am a respected real estate developer. I am running for the state senate. I need to be in that room tonight. I demand you let me inside. You demand nothing, I replied, my voice ringing with total uncompromising authority. You do not have the credentials to be in that room. You do not have the political leverage you brag about. And most importantly, you do not have the basic human decency required to earn my respect. You built your entire campaign on a massive lie. You convinced my parents to bankrupt themselves to fund an $80,000 engagement party just to impress local donors. You drained their retirement accounts for an illusion of wealth. My mother, Diane, gasped out loud, covering her mouth with her hands. The financial reality of her massive credit card debt being exposed to the National Press Corps was too much for her fragile ego to handle. She began to weep genuine tears of utter social devastation. You have absolutely no right to discuss our finances, Richard yelled, his voice cracking with pure desperation. I have every right to protect myself from parasites, I stated plainly. You all made it perfectly clear that I am not part of your high society world. I accepted your decision. I am simply enforcing the boundary you created. I am leaving you exactly where you belong on the outside. Jamal's face contorted with fury. He realized his career was evaporating. His donors would see this footage by morning. They would know he was a total fraud. He lunged forward, pointing an aggressive finger at me. You will regret this, Alyssa, he threatened, shaking with intense rage. Let us in right now, or I will destroy your career. I stood my ground, watching a man who vastly overestimated his power. Section 15, 1,000 words. I stood my ground, watching a man who vastly overestimated his power. His chest was heaving heavily, and a thick vein pulsed visibly on the side of his neck. He was completely unhinged, ready to tear down the very security apparatus of the federal government just to stroke his own bruised ego. Before Jamal could launch into another barrage of empty, pathetic threats, the heavy brass double doors at the far end of the lobby suddenly swung open. The heavy thud of the doors hitting their stoppers echoed sharply across the marble floor, instantly silencing the chaotic murmurs of the press corps. The atmosphere in the massive room shifted instantly. The raw, unfiltered tension of our family dispute was immediately overpowered by the arrival of genuine monumental political influence. A highly coordinated phalanx of elite security personnel entered first, moving with absolute synchronized precision to clear a wide path. Behind them walked Senator Harrison. He was an imposing figure, a veteran politician who had shaped national policy for over 3 decades. He moved with the effortless grace of a man who commanded entire legislative branches. He wore a masterfully tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, and his posture radiating undeniable aristocratic authority. He was surrounded by his senior aides, his press secretary, and a flurry of campaign managers who hung on his every single word. This was the exact man Jamal had been obsessively studying. This was the powerful figure Jamal desperately needed to endorse his failing grassroots campaign. Without Senator Harrison offering his blessing in the state of Virginia, a small-time real estate developer like Jamal had absolutely zero chance of winning a state Senate seat. The journalists in the lobby immediately pivoted their heavy camera lenses away from my family, turning their flashing lights toward the approaching statesman. I watched Jamal's entire demeanor undergo a sickeningly rapid transformation. The aggressive, hostile bully who had just threatened to destroy my career vanished in the blink of an eye. The red flush of anger drained from his cheeks, replaced instantly by a slick, practiced political smile that did not reach his eyes. His posture shifted from an intimidating slouch to a rigid, eager stance. He hastily adjusted the lapels of his garish silver tuxedo jacket and ran a quick, nervous hand over his perfectly groomed hair. His eyes locked onto the senator like a starving predator spotting a meal. He was completely blinded by his own ambition. He entirely forgot the severe security perimeter he was violating. He completely forgot the furious reporters standing just a few feet away recording his every move. He even forgot that I was standing right in front of him, holding the keys to the kingdom he so desperately wanted to invade. The allure of raw political power wiped everything else from his mind. Jamal physically shoved his way forward. He did not ask for space. He offered no polite "excuse me." He pushed his broad shoulder directly into my father's chest, knocking Richard off balance. My father stumbled backward, his cheap suit jacket catching on the brass velvet rope stanchion. Diane let out a sharp gasp, steadying her husband as he nearly fell onto the polished marble floor. The indignity of being shoved aside by the very man they had bankrupted themselves to impress registered briefly on my father's face before he masked it with a strained, nervous smile. Jamal did not even turn around to check if his future father-in-law was injured. He discarded the family he claimed to cherish the very second a better opportunity presented itself. Brittany frantically tried to smooth down her neon-pink ball gown, stepping forward to flank Jamal, hoping to catch the senator's eye as the supportive, glamorous political wife. She ran her hands over her heavily hair-sprayed curls, trying to look poised, despite the chaotic scene they had just created. They were like moths blindly flying toward a massive blazing fire. Jamal stepped right up to the velvet rope, pulling his shoulders back and raising his chin to project maximum confidence. He plastered on his brightest, most charismatic grin, projecting the false confidence of a seasoned political veteran. He extended his right hand over the thick red velvet barrier, holding it suspended in the air, waiting to intercept the most powerful man in the room. He was fully prepared to deliver his carefully rehearsed elevator pitch. I could practically see the words forming on his lips, ready to boast about his local real estate developments and his supposed grassroots political momentum. He was entirely convinced that his rented tuxedo and his confident smile would magically bridge the massive gap between his suburban delusions and real Washington power. I stood absolutely still, watching the pathetic scene unfold. I did not signal the security team to hold him back. I did not warn him about the strict protocols regarding approaching a high-ranking federal official unannounced. I crossed my arms over the emerald silk of my gown and waited. I knew Senator Harrison intimately. I had spent countless hours in highly classified briefings with him. I understood the rigorous, unspoken rules of his inner circle. I knew exactly how he viewed arrogant, opportunistic social climbers who tried to bypass the established hierarchy. Jamal was stepping directly into a brutal trap of his own making, and I was going to enjoy every second of the collision. The entire massive lobby seemed to hold its collective breath as the physical distance between the two men rapidly closed. The flashing press cameras illuminated Jamal's eager expression. My mother Diane was holding her breath, her hands clasped tightly together. Brittany was striking a stiff pose. They were all completely captivated by the blinding illusion of imminent success, willfully ignoring the severe reality of their situation. I watched the senator entourage step closer. I did not blink, holding my posture rigid and cold. The trap was fully set. The jaws were about to snap shut. Senator Harrison moved with the gravitational pull of a small planet. His security detail carved a flawless path through the crowded marble lobby, pushing aside journalists and eager socialites with practiced ease. Jamal leaned heavily against the red velvet rope, his bright silver tuxedo jacket catching the glare of the flashing press cameras. He extended his right hand far past the stanchion directly into the senator-designated walking path. His face was stretched into an impossibly wide grin. He opened his mouth, preparing to launch into his meticulously rehearsed elevator pitch about Oak Cliff real estate and his grassroots state senate campaign. He was vibrating with absolute certainty that this singular handshake would instantly validate his entire political existence and justify the massive debt my parents had incurred to impress him. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely in front of my emerald gown. I watched the physical distance between them evaporate. 10 feet, 5 feet, 2 feet. Jamal pushed his hand further outward, practically shoving his palm into the senator's personal space. "Senator Harrison, sir, it is an absolute honor." Jamal projected his voice booming across the lobby in a desperate attempt to sound authoritative. "I am Jamal, a leading developer in Virginia, and I have some key initiatives regarding my campaign." The senator did not even break his stride. He did not turn his head. He did not acknowledge the loud, desperate man in the garish silver jacket. His eyes simply swept over Jamal with the exact same passing indifference one might give to a decorative potted plant or a hotel luggage cart. The elite security detail flanked the senator, seamlessly boxing Jamal out and forcing him to awkwardly pull his chest back from the velvet rope to avoid being physically body-checked by the armed agents. Jamal's hand remained suspended in the empty air, hovering uselessly over the brass stanchion. The words of his grand political pitch died instantly in his throat, leaving his mouth hanging open in a silent, comical expression of absolute shock. The senator's gaze swept past the chaotic group and landed directly on me. In a fraction of a second, the veteran politician's stoic, unreadable expression dissolved into a look of profound, genuine relief. His eyes lit up with deep, authentic warmth. He abruptly altered his trajectory, bypassing the designated VIP entrance lane entirely to walk straight toward the quiet alcove where I stood. The sea of reporters and flashing cameras immediately followed his movement, swiveling their heavy lenses away from Jamal and focusing entirely on me. Alyssa the senator called out, his rich baritone voice echoing clearly across the sudden dead silence of the massive lobby. He closed the final few feet between us and reached out, grasping both of my hands in a firm, incredibly respectful grip. I offered him a calm, professional smile. "Good evening, Senator Harrison. It is wonderful to see you." He shook his head, gripping my hands tighter. The gratitude radiating from him was palpable. "Wonderful does not even begin to cover it," he announced, raising his voice so that every single journalist, political blogger, and high-ranking official in the lobby could hear him perfectly. "I have been looking for you all evening. Your crisis strategy yesterday completely saved my entire legislative bill. You navigated that absolute disaster with flawless precision. You single-handedly pulled my career back from the brink of total catastrophe. You are without a doubt the smartest woman in Washington." The collective gasp from the press corps was audible. The reporters immediately began snapping photos at a frantic, blinding pace, capturing the powerful senator, bowing his head in sincere gratitude to the woman in the emerald gown. They furiously typed his exact quote into their phones, sending the massive endorsement out to their political news desks in real time. The deputy director of crisis communications was no longer a hidden shadow figure. The senator had just publicly crowned me the premier political strategist in the nation capital. I held his gaze, maintaining my composed exterior, while a tidal wave of pure vindication washed through my veins. "Thank you, Senator," I replied smoothly. We had a narrow window to correct the narrative, but the team executed the pivot exactly as planned. "Your bill is secure, and the markets will stabilize by Monday morning." He laughed, a booming, joyful sound that echoed off the marble pillars. "Modest as always, Alyssa. The president is incredibly lucky to have you running the room. I owe you a massive debt. Anything you need tonight, anything at all, you just let my staff know." As he spoke, I let my eyes drift slowly over his shoulder to the velvet rope just a few feet away. Jamal was still standing there. He looked as if he had been physically struck by a freight train. His outstretched hand had slowly dropped to his side, but his body remained frozen in a posture of complete and utter defeat. The arrogant smirk that usually defined his face had been entirely wiped away, replaced by a pale, sickly look of pure horror. He was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally comprehending the monumental scale of his catastrophic mistake. He had spent the entire week bragging to his wealthy donors about his elite political network. He had belittled my career and told me I was socially unfit to sit at his table. Now he was standing behind a velvet rope uninvited and completely ignored watching the exact senator he desperately needed to court publicly bow down to me. The very man Jamal viewed as his golden ticket was currently holding my hands and declaring me the smartest person in the Capitol. Right beside Jamal, my family was experiencing a simultaneous psychological meltdown. My father, Richard, looked as if the air had been violently sucked out of his lungs. He gripped the brass stanchion for physical support, his knuckles turning white. He had stood in front of a live camera just last night and told his country club friends that I was a struggling mess with a dead-end clerical job. He had loudly proclaimed that Jamal was the true legacy of our family. Now he was watching his preferred son-in-law being treated like absolute garbage, while the daughter he discarded was being praised as a national savior. My mother, Diane, was trembling visibly. The heavy fake jewelry around her neck rattled as her chest heaved. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp of pure social devastation. She realized instantly that the reporters surrounding us had heard every single word. They were documenting this exact moment. The illusion she had bankrupted herself to maintain was shattering into a million jagged pieces. And Brittany, my sister, was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Her neon pink sequined gown suddenly looked incredibly cheap and foolish under the harsh lights of the press cameras. She had excluded me from her engagement party because she thought I would embarrass her. Now she was the one standing in the lobby looking like a desperate party crasher, watching her older sister command the absolute respect of the most powerful people in the country. The jaws of the trap had not just snapped shut. They had completely pulverized everything my family valued. I squeezed the senator's hands and smiled warmly, fully aware that Jamal was watching my every move. The profound silence from my family was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I had not raised my voice. I had not thrown a tantrum. I had simply stood in my truth and let their own arrogance orchestrate their total destruction. The harsh flashing lights of the cameras reflected off the marble floors, highlighting the massive, impassable divide between my world and theirs. Jamal swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly above his tight velvet bow tie. He looked utterly pathetic, stripped of his fake power and exposed as a complete fraud to the entire Washington press corps. He was a completely ruined man who now understood his absolute insignificance. Senator Harrison followed my gaze. His warm smile faded as his sharp political instincts picked up on the heavy hostile tension radiating from the velvet rope. He took a half step back, scanning the garish group that had been screaming at his security detail just moments prior. His eyes swept over my father, poorly fitted suit, my mother, heavy fake pearls, Brittany neon pink ball gown, and finally landed on Jamal, ridiculous silver tuxedo jacket. The senator's expression shifted from joyous gratitude to polite confusion. He looked back at me, his brow furrowed slightly. "Are these VIPs with you, Alyssa?" the senator asked, his voice carrying clearly over the hushed whispers of the surrounding press corps. He gestured toward Jamal, who was still gripping the brass stanchion like a drowning man holding onto a life raft. The senator tone was completely neutral, but the implication was devastating. He was openly questioning why such an obnoxious out-of-place group was hovering so aggressively near our private conversation. This was the moment. This was the exact fraction of a second where the entire balance of power permanently shifted. For 33 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had endured their endless mocking, their financial exploitation, and their cruel exclusion. They had driven all the way to Washington, expecting me to fold under pressure and hand them the keys to my kingdom. They thought their public presence would force me into quiet compliance. I turned my body fully toward the velvet rope. I looked my father, Richard, dead in the eye. I watched him swallow hard, his face pale and sweating under the harsh lobby lights. I looked at my mother, Diane, who was currently trembling with absolute terror. I looked at my sister, Brittany, who looked incredibly small and pathetic in her cheap, glittering dress. And finally, I locked eyes with Jamal. I stared directly into the soul of the arrogant man who had explicitly demanded I prostitute my political capital to save his fraudulent campaign. I did not raise my voice. I did not sound angry or bitter. I delivered the ultimate payoff with chilling, calculated precision. "No, sir," I answered, my voice ringing like a crystal bell in the dead, silent lobby. "These are estranged relatives who explicitly told me last week I was a failure and too socially unfit to attend their parties. They crashed here without an invitation." The words landed with the destructive force of a tactical missile strike. The silence that followed was so profound it was almost deafening. And then the absolute chaos erupted. The press corps surrounding us lost their collective minds. The political journalists who had been quietly observing the scene suddenly realized they were witnessing the most dramatic social execution of the entire political season. Camera flashes exploded like a violent lightning storm, illuminating the sheer, unadulterated horror on my family faces. Digital recorders were shoved forward to capture every single agonizing second of their public humiliation. Reporters furiously tapped on their glowing screens, sending the shocking quote directly to their news desks. The deputy director of crisis communications had just publicly disowned a local political hopeful on live audio. Jamal's face went from sickly pale to a deep mottled purple. His jaw worked furiously, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. He desperately wanted to defend himself, to spin a clever lie, to charm his way out of the disaster. But there was no spin left. He was completely disarmed. He had walked into the highest arena of power and picked a fight with the executioner. "Alyssa, please, my mother," Diane wailed. Her voice was shrill and cracking with genuine panic. She reached her hand over the velvet rope again, her heavy bracelets clanking together. "You do not mean that. We are your family. We love you. We are just so proud of you." The sheer desperation in her voice was pathetic. It was not the plea of a loving mother. It was the frantic begging of a social climber watching her entire fake universe collapse into dust. She was begging for mercy from the exact same daughter she had repeatedly told to hide in a cheap spa just 4 days ago. Senator Harrison did not even flinch at her theatrical tears. He was a man who had survived decades of ruthless political warfare. He could spot a grifter from a mile away, and he was currently looking at 4 of them. His posture became incredibly rigid, his aristocratic features settling into a mask of absolute freezing disdain. He turned his imposing frame toward Jamal and my parents, evaluating them with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for hostile foreign adversaries. My father, Richard, desperately tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "Senator Harrison," he stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably, "this is a massive misunderstanding. Alyssa is my daughter. Jamal here is running for the state senate in Virginia. We are strong supporters of your infrastructure bill. We just wanted to introduce ourselves and celebrate Alyssa's success together as a family." Richard attempted to offer a weak, miserable smile. It was the most embarrassing display of sycophancy I had ever witnessed. He was throwing away every last ounce of his dignity just to try and appease a man who viewed him as nothing more than a trespassing nuisance. Jamal finally found his voice. He puffed out his chest, trying one last pathetic time to project the false confidence that had fooled Oakcliff. Senator, he began, attempting to sound like a seasoned insider. I have significant financial backing in Virginia. I have major donors who are ready to align with your platform. We can definitely help each other out if we just step inside and talk. It was the fatal error. Jamal had fundamentally misunderstood the entire situation. He thought he could buy his way out of the execution by offering cheap political favors to a true titan of the Senate. Senator Harrison did not blink. He stared at Jamal with absolute aristocratic disgust that could have frozen a raging river. The senator had spent his life navigating treacherous global diplomacy and high-stakes legislation. The idea that an Oak Cliff developer was trying to bribe him with imaginary donors was profoundly offensive. The senator slowly turned his head to look back at me, seeking silent confirmation. I held his gaze and offered a single sharp nod. The execution was fully authorized. Harrison turned back to the rope. His dense tone commanded absolute obedience from everyone within earshot. A man who disrespects his own family, he began, his voice echoing like thunder. Especially a woman of Alyssa caliber has absolutely no place in my political circles. You are a fraud, sir. You are severely testing my patience by trespassing at this event. Jamal's face went completely slack. His political career was dead, and the executioner had not even bothered to learn his last name. Senator Harrison did not wait for a response. He raised his right hand and made a sharp motion to his lead security agent. "Remove the trash." Agent Miller stepped forward instantly. He was joined by 4 armed Secret Service agents and half a dozen massive private security guards. They moved with terrifying efficiency, closing in around my family like a collapsing iron wall. "It is time to leave," Agent Miller announced, his voice completely devoid of any negotiation. "Turn around and walk toward the exit immediately." My father, Richard, finally realized the monumental scale of their defeat. His bravado vanished, leaving behind a broken, humiliated old man. He grabbed my mother by the arm, trying to pull her away. "Come on, Diane," he muttered, his voice trembling with deep shame. "We are leaving." Diane was completely paralyzed by the social devastation unfolding around her. She was weeping openly, her heavy makeup running down her cheeks in thick, dark streams. She looked wildly at the flashing cameras, capturing her total humiliation. "Alyssa, please," Diane wailed, dragging her feet. "Do not let them do this to us. Tell them we are your parents." I stood perfectly still, my facial expression carved from solid blue ice. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I let the security guards physically step between us, cutting off her line of sight. Brittany threw a massive, unhinged tantrum. The golden child was entirely unaccustomed to hearing the word no. She stomped her feet, her neon pink ball gown rustling loudly as a burly security guard firmly grasped her elbow. "Let go of me!" she screamed, her shrill voice piercing the air. "You cannot touch me. My fiancé is going to be a state senator. You are all going to be fired." The guards ignored her pathetic threats, physically turning her toward the revolving doors. But the absolute climax belonged entirely to Jamal. He could not accept that his delusion of grandeur had been completely shattered. As 2 massive hotel security guards moved to flank him, Jamal panicked. He violently yanked his arm away from the nearest guard, refusing to be escorted out like a common criminal. "Get your hands off me!" Jamal roared, his face contorted with ugly, desperate rage. "I am a major donor. I know people in this city." The physical resistance was the worst mistake he could have made. The security detail immediately escalated their response. The 2 guards grabbed Jamal, twisting his arms firmly behind his back in a professional restraint hold. They lifted him slightly off the marble floor, forcing him to walk on his tiptoes. The paparazzi surrounding the scene went absolutely feral. This was the golden shot they had been waiting for. Dozens of camera flashes erupted simultaneously, bathing Jamal in a harsh, blinding light. They captured every humiliating angle of the aggressive struggle. They photographed his garish silver tuxedo jacket wrinkling as he was forcibly manhandled. They captured his mouth wide open in a furious scream. They documented the exact moment the aspiring politician was physically dragged across the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton like a violent drunk. I watched the entire spectacle unfold with profound, absolute satisfaction. I watched my father shuffling out in deep disgrace. I watched my mother weeping over her destroyed social status. I watched my sister throwing a childish tantrum. And I watched the man who had arrogantly demanded my obedience being physically thrown out into the cold Washington night. The heavy glass hotel revolving doors spun rapidly, spitting my toxic family out onto the wet pavement outside. The security detail immediately locked the perimeter doors, forming a solid human wall to ensure they could not re-enter. The chaotic noise of their screaming faded, instantly cut off by the thick glass. The lobby slowly returned to a state of calm. The reporters frantically began reviewing their footage, eagerly whispering about the massive political scandal they had just witnessed. Senator Harrison turned his back on the exit, completely dismissing the chaotic scene that had just occurred. He looked at me, his warm, respectful smile returning to his aristocratic features. He extended his arm toward the grand ballroom doors. "Shall we go inside, Alyssa?" he asked smoothly. "The Secretary of State is eager to hear your thoughts on the upcoming summit." I looked at the heavy velvet ropes one last time. The space where my family had stood just moments ago was completely empty. They were gone. Their toxic grip on my life had been completely severed by their own monumental arrogance. I turned away from the lobby doors, letting the past dissolve. "I would be honored, Senator," I replied, placing my hand lightly on his arm. Together we walked through the towering wooden doors and stepped into the glittering ballroom. The warm golden light washed over me, welcoming me back into the highest echelon of absolute power. I had protected my sanctuary. I had defended my worth. I had won the war without ever raising my voice. This victory was completely mine. Section 19, 1,000 words. Sunday morning arrived with a crisp, bright sunrise pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury apartment overlooking the Potomac River. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in years. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and walked out onto my private balcony, taking in the sweeping panoramic views of the Washington Monument. The city was quiet, but the digital world was currently experiencing a massive seismic earthquake. I opened my secure tablet and navigated to the primary political news feeds. The absolute destruction of my family was already the top trending story across the entire eastern seaboard. The photographs captured by the paparazzi at the Ritz-Carlton lobby had gone completely viral overnight. Major political blogs and local news outlets in Virginia were running the exact same devastating headline. Local developer escorted out of elite Washington gala, following security disturbance. The high-resolution images were absolutely ruthless. They featured Jamal in his garish silver tuxedo jacket, his face contorted in an ugly, desperate scream as two massive security guards physically lifted him off the marble floor. Another photo perfectly captured the exact moment of his ultimate humiliation, showing him being shoved through the revolving doors while my mother Diane wept hysterically in the background. The public fallout for Jamal was instantaneous and completely catastrophic. He had spent months promising local business owners and wealthy investors that he possessed exclusive access to federal lawmakers. He had collected thousands of dollars in early campaign contributions based entirely on his fabricated political leverage. By 8 in the morning, those enraged donors were pulling their funding completely. The comment sections on the news articles were flooded with mocking statements from the very people he had tried to impress. They called him a desperate fraud, a con artist, and a pathetic social climber. His fragile political career was completely dead before he even had the chance to officially announce his candidacy. He was permanently blacklisted from every respected political circle in the state. Back in Oak Cliff, Virginia, my parents were facing an equally brutal execution of their own making. Sunday brunch at the local country club was usually their favorite weekly opportunity to flaunt their supposed superiority. Today it was the site of their absolute social ruin. The latest issue of Time magazine had officially saturated the affluent suburban town. The wealthy neighbors and minor politicians my parents had desperately tried to impress at the engagement party were now holding the glossy magazine in their hands. They were staring at my face spread across the centerfold. They were reading the bold text explicitly identifying me as the strategic mind behind the survival of the nation. The devastating contrast between the reality of my monumental power and the pathetic lies my parents had told was impossible to ignore. Just days earlier, my father Richard had loudly proclaimed to the entire town that I was a struggling mess working a dead-end clerical job. He had publicly humiliated me to elevate Jamal. Now the entire Oak Cliff community realized my parents were completely delusional liars who had actively alienated a high-ranking White House official just to support a fraudulent wannabe politician. The social backlash was swift and entirely merciless. My parents were immediately ostracized. The elite friends they had bankrupted themselves to impress stopped returning their calls. The country club members turned their backs when my parents walked into the room. Their carefully constructed facade of aristocratic wealth and prestige was completely pulverized. They were exposed as cruel, shallow hypocrites who had thrown away their most successful child for absolutely nothing. My personal phone, which I had retrieved from my desk drawer, sat quietly on my kitchen island. I had temporarily unblocked their numbers just to witness the final stage of their desperate panic. I opened my voicemail and saw 7 new messages. The arrogant, demanding tones they had used all week were completely gone. In their place was the pathetic whining of broken, defeated people begging for salvation. I pressed play on the first voicemail. It was my mother, Diane. She was sobbing so hard she could barely form coherent sentences. "Alyssa, please, you have to help us," she wailed, her voice cracking with raw terror. "The neighbors are laughing at us. Jamal donors are threatening to sue him for fraud. Brittany will not stop crying. Please just issue a public statement saying it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we are a good family. We are begging you." The next voicemail was from my father. His corporate bravado had entirely evaporated, leaving a shaky, desperate old man. "Alyssa, I am so incredibly sorry," he pleaded. "I was wrong to say those things at the party. I was just trying to protect our image. Please, you have the power to fix this. Call Senator Harrison. Get Jamal back in his good graces. We will do anything you want. Just do not let them destroy us." I listened to their frantic begging with absolute cold indifference. They were not apologizing because they felt genuine remorse for their lifetime of emotional abuse. They were not sorry for abandoning me or calling me a failure. They were only apologizing because they had been publicly caught and their precious social status was bleeding out on the national stage. They wanted me to use my immense political capital to rescue them from the burning building they had deliberately set on fire. I picked up my phone and opened the group text message thread that contained my mother, my father, and my sister. I did not write a long paragraph detailing their failures. I did not explain my feelings or demand a genuine apology. I simply delivered the final devastating blow with absolute unwavering precision. I typed exactly 9 words. "The White House doesn't negotiate with emotional terrorists." I hit send. I watched the delivery notification appear beneath the text bubble confirming that the message had successfully reached their devices. I did not wait for a response. I immediately went into my phone settings and permanently blocked their phone numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked their social media accounts. I severed the final remaining thread that tied me to Oak Cliff, Virginia, locking them entirely out of my life forever. I set the phone face down on the cool quartz countertop. The deep, unbroken silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a protective shield. I left the device sitting on the quartz and walked slowly toward the massive sliding glass doors of my living room. I pushed the heavy handle and stepped out onto the expansive private balcony. The crisp morning air washed over my face, carrying the distinct electric energy of the Capitol waking up. Far below me, the city of Washington was already moving with deliberate purpose. Black government vehicles glided smoothly down the avenues, and ambitious political aides hurried along the sidewalks, clutching their morning coffees. I leaned my hands against the cool metal railing and looked straight ahead. The Washington Monument pierced the clear blue sky, a towering obelisk of solid white marble reflecting the brilliant morning sun. It stood perfectly still, unyielding and absolute. It reminded me of exactly who I had become. For 33 years, I had carried the crushing weight of my family expectations. I had allowed their constant criticism to echo in my mind every time I achieved something monumental. I used to genuinely believe that if I just worked a little harder or achieved a little more, they would finally look at me with the same adoration they showered on Brittany. I had spent my entire youth starving for a single crumb of validation from parents who were fundamentally incapable of offering it. I had let them define my worth, treating my quiet nature as a fatal flaw and my independence as a severe liability. They had convinced me that I was the broken one. But standing on this balcony, breathing in the sweet air of total liberation, I realized the absolute truth. I was never broken. I was simply planted in toxic soil. The most profound realization of the entire weekend was that I did not have to fight them to win. I did not have to lower myself to their chaotic, embarrassing level. I did not have to throw a public tantrum like Brittany or scream empty threats like Jamal. I never raised my voice in that hotel lobby. I never shed a single tear of frustration. I did not hurl childish insults or engage in a screaming match to prove my superiority. I simply let them expose their true nature to the world. When you deal with people who operate entirely on manipulation and false appearances, your greatest weapon is not aggression. Your greatest weapon is undeniable success and absolutely airtight boundaries. My family fed on emotional reactions. They wanted me to cry when they excluded me. They wanted me to beg for an invitation to their pathetic engagement party. They wanted me to feel inferior so they could feel powerful. When I denied them that reaction, I stripped them of their entire arsenal. My silence starved their ego. My success crushed their false narrative. My boundaries locked them out of the kingdom they so desperately wanted to invade. The irony of my profession was not lost on me. I spent my days drafting words that carried the weight of the federal government. I crafted messages that calmed plunging stock markets and reassured frightened populations. I knew the immense power of language better than anyone, yet it was the absolute absence of language that ultimately secured my personal freedom. The refusal to engage, the refusal to explain. I had spent so many years trying to find the perfect words to make my parents love me. I thought if I could just articulate my feelings clearly enough, they would finally understand my pain. It took Jamal screaming in a hotel lobby for me to realize that you cannot communicate with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Their ears were permanently closed to my truth. Therefore, my silence was the exact response they deserved. They had driven all the way to the Capitol expecting a wounded, vulnerable girl who would yield to familial pressure. Instead, they met a highly trained crisis manager who viewed them not as family, but as a hostile threat to be neutralized. I had managed national security leaks and navigated global diplomatic disasters. Handling a small-town real estate developer and two status-obsessed parents was effortless. I used the exact same tactical precision I applied to my job. Assess the threat, contain the damage, control the narrative, and eliminate the vulnerability. The vulnerability was my lingering hope that they would someday change. That hope was now completely dead, and I felt nothing but profound relief at its passing. I looked down at the bustling city streets one last time, feeling a deep sense of ownership over my life. I had built this reality with my own two hands. Every late-night study session, every brutal diner shift, every high-stakes political negotiation had led me to this exact balcony. I did not owe a fraction of my success to Richard or Diane. They did not finance my education. They did not support my career. They did not comfort me during my struggles. They were merely bystanders who tried to claim the trophy after I had already won the race. From this day forward, my life would be entirely my own. The group chat was permanently deleted. The contact numbers were blocked. The bridge back to Oak Cliff, Virginia was burned to ash and scattered to the wind. I would never again have to endure another holiday dinner filled with passive-aggressive insults. I would never have to listen to my father brag about Jamal's fake accomplishments. I would never have to watch my mother drain her bank accounts to appease Brittany's endless demands. They were trapped in their miserable, superficial world, and they would have to face the catastrophic consequences of their public humiliation entirely alone. I was completely unburdened. I turned away from the railing and walked back inside my beautiful, quiet apartment. I closed the heavy glass door, sealing out the noise of the city. I walked past the kitchen island, ignoring the dead phone resting on the counter. I had a busy week ahead. The president had a major policy address on Tuesday, and my team needed a comprehensive media strategy by tomorrow morning. I was ready to get back to work. I was ready to continue shaping the future. Family isn't always a safe harbor. Sometimes they are the anchor trying to drag you down to their level. Have you ever had to use your own silence and success to destroy the people who underestimated you? Tell me your story in the comments below. The story of Alyssa serves as a powerful testament to a profound realization. True power does not roar, it remains silent. For years, she endured the crushing weight of her family emotional abuse and was constantly measured against an impossible superficial standard. The fundamental lesson here is that you cannot negotiate your self-worth with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. When faced with manipulative family members or opportunistic individuals, the natural instinct is often to fight back. We want to scream the truth or desperately seek validation. However, as this journey vividly illustrates, reacting with anger only feeds their toxic ecosystem. Manipulators thrive on emotional responses because it validates their control. By choosing absolute silence and implementing ironclad boundaries, you starve them of the reaction they desperately crave. A simple refusal to engage is not a surrender. It is the ultimate declaration of independence. Furthermore, this narrative teaches us that the best retaliation is genuinely living well and building an authentic life. Success, when achieved through relentless hard work and quiet determination, acts as an impenetrable shield. You do not need to actively orchestrate the downfall of those who wrong you. When you remove yourself as their protective buffer, their own arrogance and delusions of grandeur will inevitably lead to their collapse. Healing begins the exact moment you stop trying to fit into a space where you are not valued. You must instead focus on cultivating your own undeniable path. Ultimately, true belonging is not defined by bloodlines or forced obligations, but by mutual respect and unwavering support. Reclaiming your peace often requires walking away from the very people expected to protect you. If you are currently shrinking yourself to fit into a toxic narrative, establish your boundaries right now and start investing all that energy into your own undeniable success.